come with our reliance on domesticated products is that we've also started to eat food that isn't really food. I mean, when you look at a lot of the processed or packaged stuff that we eat, Twinkies, Cheetos, eh, Coca-Cola, things like that. We're not talking about things that have any even recognizable components that's food. I mean, a Cheeto doesn't look a thing like the corn-based flour that's used as its base. Coca-Cola doesn't look a thing like high fructose corn syrup, right? But in essence, that's what it is. It's liquefied corn. So we have taken our dietary changes that we started with domestication and driven them even farther with this kind of advent of industrialized food production. I mean, we laugh about things like Soylent Green. It's people too, right? Which comes from, I'm spacing on the name of the piece of fiction right now, but bars that were made from people, people becoming food for other people. So, we have gotten to the point where we've accepted eggs from China that don't involve birds. They are chemically engineered eggs. We also have accepted meat imports from China, specifically chicken. There's some chicken from China that doesn't involve any animals at all, that isn't really chicken, but is a laboratory created substitute. So, with our addressing these six steps of humanness, one thing that we're going to kind of revisit over the course of the term is the implications of these six steps or these six changes. These six steps are associated with ever increasing brain size. We have the largest brain to body size ratio of any species, with the exception of toothed whales. Baleen whales, we've got a larger brain to body size ratio. So if we're talking about blue whales or humpback whales, we're smarter. But it's dolphins and orcas and porpoises and belugas who have a larger neocortex even than we do. So we could really probably say that dolphins are smarter than us. That the problem is we can't actually understand them to make any inferences. So the line from Douglas Adams, "So long and thanks for all the fish," where the dolphins left well before the earth blew up, there's probably some truth to that. All right, so our increase in brain size has affected our patterns of development, has affected our tool complexity, has affected our life history stages, has affected our group living and degree of cooperation. Massive, massive implications of increasing brain size. Over time, we also have an increased reliance on cultural adaptation. Modern populations are almost entirely dependent upon cultural learning and or adaptation. Now, we're not talking about modern as in 2019. We are talking about modern as in anatomically modern Homo sapiens. So, arguably from about 200 or 300,000 years ago, that we have been more reliant upon culture than we have biology. For example, we hunted megafauna during the ice ages. That means the earth was frozen and it was animals like woolly mammoths. How did we do that without dying? We didn't grow thick body hair. Instead, we used animal skins and furs to cover our bodies and make clothing, right? So, this is remarkable that we were able to innovate things that allow us to be successful in increasingly harsh environments. It's one reason why we find humans almost everywhere on the globe. We don't find humans in deep ocean, at least not for long periods of time. We don't find humans inside volcanoes. Those are two kinds of habitats. You could argue that we don't find humans in Antarctica, in extreme cold. We do find humans across the Arctic Circle, but Antarctica, you can't live there long term without bringing in supplies, particularly food and fuel for energy. We also have to stress this importance of something called cultural consolidation. This is the amassing of large quantities of cultural information over time that is passed on often, or at least historically, through oral traditions. Now it's not so much oral traditions as it is written works, written books. But prior to the advent of writing about 5,500 years ago, we relied on oral traditions to pass on this information. This expands what we're able to learn. This expands what we're able to communicate. This is really, 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 really key. When we think about social learning, there are a number of species that do it. Dogs learn socially. right? You can teach a dog a trick, and another dog observing that dog can pick up the same trick. You can do the same thing to a wide variety of non-human primate species. Chimpanzees that have learned observationally are able to solve problems faster than those that haven't watched other members of their species solve that same task. So we are not unique in our ability to learn through social learning. We are unique in our what we call imitation. There's this great video clip. I will put it in the optional resources for this week, but it shows human children and chimps solving the same task. So in the first part of the clip, there's a box that's placed before both the human children and the chimps. And that box, then the researcher does a series of movements. They tap, they slide a lever, they kind of fiddle with the side of the box, they open up a door, and then there's a gummy bear. When that box is opaque, both the chimpanzees and the human children copy every step of the researcher who's demonstrating how to use the box with fidelity, meaning they do everything the researcher does to the T. The difference comes when the box is transparent. And when that box is clear, the chimpanzees see that all of the first steps are unnecessary. All you have to do is open up the door and get the gummy bear out. And the chimps cut to the chase. They just immediately go for the reward. The human children, by contrast, still go through every single step. They still blindly imitate. And so we could argue and maybe say that, well, chimps are smarter than human children because they cut out all the unnecessary steps. But when we think about cultural consolidation, imitation is key. Kids are primed to blindly believe everything that is told to them. And that is advantageous. I mean, you think about really rare climatic events like, I don't know, a 500-year drought cycle. If we had to experience things directly to know how to cope with them, none of us would be able to survive a 500-year drought cycle because we wouldn't have any knowledge. We might know how to solve a 50-year drought cycle or, periodic years of drought, but we wouldn't have directly, nobody alive would have directly experienced the massive drought that comes once every 500 years. So how did we cope with it? Well, we do that through oral traditions. We pass on the knowledge of very rare events or events that occur in very infrequently or on this kind of long time scale. We pass on that information through oral traditions so that our children's 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 children will know how to deal with that once every 500 years drought, or will know how to deal with these exceedingly rare events. So this ties into differences in our learning patterns, but I mean, think about it. Think about what your major is. Maybe you want to go into, I don't know, engineering, right? If you start an engineering program as a freshman, much of the information that you learn is going to be obsolete by the time you graduate. So, I mean, the degree to which we are innovating things related to computers and technology, related to certain aspects of engineering, related to certain medical procedures, etc. We're have this massive pace of cultural change, and we don't have to teach a lot of the old information anymore. We don't have to experience a lot of the old information anymore, right? We can do anatomy and physiology without actually touching a cadaver. Isn't that phenomenal? That you don't have to actually work with the human body to have understanding of human organ systems. So, I mean, if you're going to ever be a surgeon, it's helpful to have practice on human bodies. But if you're just taking anatomy and physiology because it's a background course that's needed for your biochemistry degree, you don't have to actually cut into cadavers, right? You can use virtual cadavers. You can use cell plates, images of tissue that are widely available. So it's really phenomenal what we're able to accomplish and learn through this cultural consolidation. All right, so how do we learn what we do? How do biological anthropologists know what they know? Well, the most important aspect for you to understand is that anthropology is both a hard science and a social science. With biological anthropology, a lot of what we're doing is hard science based. That means we are following the scientific method and we are perhaps quite critically doing some experimentation. If you were taking cultures around the world, or the 1130, the Introduction to Cultural Anthropology, you would talk more maybe about the social science aspects of anthropology. But much of what we do in evolutionary anthropology is based in human biology, which is a hard science. So we have to just review the scientific method. How do we do the scientific method? Well, think back to middle school and science fair. You ask a question. The scientific method starts where you ask a question about something you observe. The how, what, when, where, who, which, why. Right? You do background research. You don't have to start from scratch. You use the collective amassed information through cultural consolidation to understand kind of your starting point, which means you can ask more sophisticated questions. You can also make sure you don't repeat mistakes that have been done in the past. You construct a hypothesis. A hypothesis is an educated guess about how things work. You have to use your hypothesis to make predictions. Then those predictions are testable through your experimental design. So your hypothesis might be, I don't know, that grains cause an increase in dental caries. And your prediction would be that because grains are metabolized into sugars, and because sugars fuel the bacteria that are prevalent in the human mouth, then therefore grains lead to more consumption of grains lead to more bacteria, which then leads to more dental caries. You test your hypothesis by doing an experiment. Your experiment will test whether your prediction is accurate and whether your hypothesis is supported or not. So if we're looking at the effect of grains and dental caries, we might compare two populations. One that doesn't consume grains, many hunter-gatherer groups don't. One that consumes a lot of grains. Or we might even have 4 or 5 populations that have different levels of grain consumption. And we can compare the dental health and hygiene of those different populations. We also might take teeth that are no longer present in human mouths and inoculate them, or take some human tissue, some gum tissue, and inoculate it with bacteria and feed that bacteria metabolized grains versus straight sugar versus something else like, I don't know, vegetable fiber or something. So there are a number of ways we could kind of design an experiment to test that hypothesis. Once your experiment is done, you analyze your data, you draw a conclusion. You've got to have quantifiable data, you've got to have numbers, right? You have to be able to, for good hard science, you've got to be able to employ statistical methods to be able to analyze your data. You've got things like hypothesis testing that that lends credence to your opinion that your data supports your hypothesis. And then lastly, you've got to communicate your results. Professional scientists publish their reports in scientific journals. They might present their results on a poster or during a talk at a scientific meeting. These are the steps of the scientific method, and this is how much of biological anthropology is done. Now here we've got some humor. Babies know the scientific method. They make an observation, they form a hypothesis, they perform the experiment, they analyze the data, they report their finding, their unhappiness with the taste of whatever it was, to their parents through crying, and then they invite others to reproduce the results. So, we are, why do I post this? Well, I mean, maybe it's to get a laugh, but to tell you also that humans are naturally scientists. I mean, you might have this preconceived notion in the back of your mind that you're no good at math or science. That's actually not true. Your performance might be low in math and science, but it's really because you've sabotaged yourself. Humans have a natural ability to think about things mathematically, and to think about things scientifically, and to question the world and work out solutions to things, and work out kind of how they conceptualize or think of things. It is your social environment that then convinces you that you're no good at science or math. Now, the problem that we have at the societal level is that girls by the age of 6 entering first grade believe they're no good at science or math. This is why we've had such a big push towards women in STEM fields, because culturally we are already conditioning our girls to think they're no good in science and math by the time they enter first grade. Why would it not surprise us then when they do horribly in high school and college in science and math fields? So, this interplay between culture and biology, this interplay between the environment and what you're capable of genetically or biologically, that's what leads to you, quote unquote, being no good at science. We are natural scientists. We look at the world inquisitively and want to generate explanations about the world. All right, so the last bit of meat that we're going to talk about is theory versus law. And this ties into our quote unquote belief in evolution, right? One of the contradictions or one of the criticisms of evolution is that, oh, it's just a theory. Well, scientific law is the description of an observed phenomenon. It doesn't explain why the phenomenon occurs or what the causal pathway is for that phenomenon. And so if you look at the Venn diagram here on the bottom, the law summarizes a set of observations about natural phenomena. The explanation of the why is the theory, okay? And so here we've got theories solely explain why natural phenomena occur. When theories and laws interlap, you get commonalities. They're based on hypotheses. They can, to some degree, be used to make predictions. They can be revised. In everyday language, theory means a hunch or a guess, but for scientists, theory means well-supported explanations. People often confuse laws and theories. So, for example, the law would be Newton's gravity, right? The law of gravity. The explanation would be something else. The law might include fundamental aspects of, unmutable laws of thermodynamics, whereas the theory explaining it might be something like relativity. So laws say what will happen, theories explain why something happens. Laws generate predictable outcomes or identify predictable outcomes. Theories explain the nature of those outcomes. Both are based on evidence. Evolution is law. This is the observation that organisms, including plants, animals, bacteria, mold, virus particles, etc., they change over time. Evolution is law. Now, evolutionary theory, or this concept of evolution by natural selection, that's the theory that explains how evolution occurs. So as you move forward in this course, I want you to be able to distinguish this difference between what you can believe in and what is irrefutably true. Evolution is true. Okay? Does that mean that you can't believe in God? No, absolutely not. You can change your explanation of how evolution occurs, right? Maybe God seeded the planet with life through some kind of method of creation. There are things with respect to the origins of life and how life has reached this point that we're at that we don't understand scientifically yet. And that's where faith can come in, and where people often use faith for their explanations. But by saying that you don't believe in evolution, that doesn't mean it isn't true. We are not, we are animals first and foremost. We have biological urges that are driven by our genetics, by our physiology, by our hormones, by our endocrinology. All of this stuff, we also are capable of higher thought. So, identifying us as evolved organisms doesn't failed to explain things like having higher thought. We're going to talk about how this large brain size and the ability to innovate culturally emerged, but it also doesn't excuse us for behaviors. So, we identify something like, orangutans have to sometimes engage in rape or they're not going to be able to have sex. Well, that doesn't then excuse human rape. Right? Just because some males do it doesn't mean that we should be accepting of rape as a naturally occurring phenomenon. So this is one kind of really important thing to take home when we talk about humans, right? We've got animalistic urges and instincts. We engage in some really harsh and violent, horrible behavior that is very similar to what some of our ancestors and or closely related species do, but that doesn't excuse those behaviors because we are also capable then of higher thought. All right, so in summary, be able to identify anthropology and identify the four subfields. be able to define evolutionary anthropology and its two key concepts. We are evolved. We are also a product of this interaction between our genetics and the environment, or our individual life histories. Know the types of things that evolutionary anthropologists study. Be able to identify the 6 steps of humanness, or how humans differ from other animals. That includes bipedality, non-honing chewing, so forth. Understand and describe the scientific method and identify the difference between scientific law and scientific theory.